I still remember the sound. Not the police knocking on my neighbor's door weeks later. Not the shouting that echoed through those paper-thin townhouse walls. It was the first trumpet note at 6:15 on a freezing December morning that made me realize sometimes the cleanest revenge isn't loud because you're angry. It's loud because someone else insisted on writing the rules. My name is Ethan Mercer. I'm 35. I work as a software architect from home. And until that Christmas, I honestly believed the easiest way to survive an HOA neighborhood was to smile, pay your dues on time, and stay invisible. I lived in a quiet townhouse community outside Centennial, Colorado. 20 units lined up like dominoes, all built by the same developer who apparently thought insulation was an optional upgrade. You could hear somebody sneeze through the walls. If a dog barked 3 houses away, everybody knew which dog it was. Most people accepted it because the neighborhood was clean, property values stayed decent, and nobody wanted drama. Well, almost nobody. The exception was our HOA president, Monica Caldwell. Monica was the kind of person who treated every board meeting like she was running a Fortune 500 company instead of managing a row of attached homes with matching mailboxes. She drove a brand new luxury SUV, walked around with a leather binder full of bylaws, and somehow always managed to know exactly when somebody left their trash can out 20 minutes too long. I wasn't on her radar for almost 2 years. I worked, kept my little patio clean, waved at neighbors, and spent most evenings gaming with friends or calling my parents back in Missouri. Then December rolled around, and with it came Monica's favorite season, the season of telling everyone else what Christmas should look like. One Thursday afternoon, I came back from grabbing coffee and found an envelope taped perfectly in the center of my front door. It wasn't slipped under the mat or tucked into the mailbox. No, she wanted everyone walking past to see it. Inside was a professionally printed letter titled Holiday Community Family Gift Initiative. It sounded official enough that I actually laughed before I even finished reading it. Monica explained that every homeowner was expected to contribute $250 towards special Christmas gifts for her teenage twin boys because, according to the letter, they had spent years sacrificing while she volunteered countless hours serving the neighborhood. Then came my favorite sentence. Participation was considered an expectation of good community citizenship, and refusal might be reviewed for possible violations of neighborhood cooperation standards. I read that line 3 times because I honestly couldn't believe someone had typed it, printed it, laminated the signature page, and thought, yeah, that's perfectly normal. I wasn't upset yet, mostly confused, so I sent a polite email. I thanked her for organizing something festive, explained that I already had family commitments and charities I supported every December, and wished her family a Merry Christmas. That was it. No sarcasm, no insults. I figured she'd roll her eyes, complain to somebody else, and move on. Instead, the next afternoon, while I was on a Zoom meeting discussing a software rollout, my phone buzzed with a ring notification. 2 police officers were standing outside my garage. I excused myself from the meeting and walked downstairs wondering if someone had broken into the neighborhood. One officer looked embarrassed before he even spoke. "Sir," he said, "we received a complaint that your vehicle was blocking emergency access." I pressed the garage door opener. The door rolled up. My truck sat exactly where it always had, completely inside my garage. The younger officer actually sighed before shaking his head. "Sorry to bother you. We have to respond when someone calls." They left less than 2 minutes later, but the damage wasn't really about wasting my time. It was the message. Monica wanted me to know she could create problems whenever she felt like it. That evening, I saw her walking her dog, and she smiled the kind of smile people wear when they think they've already won. "Everything okay?" she asked sweetly. The officers seemed concerned. I smiled back. "Everything's great. They said my garage is working exactly as intended." Her smile disappeared for half a second before she recovered and kept walking. That's when I realized this wasn't about Christmas money anymore. It was about control. A couple of days later, I bumped into her sons while checking my mailbox. Nice kids, polite, nothing like their mother. We chatted about school, football, and Christmas break. I asked what they hoped Santa would bring. One of them grinned and said, "Honestly, we'd both love trumpets. We've been begging Mom to let us join the school jazz band." His brother laughed. "She says they're too loud." That sentence stayed in my head the entire drive to work the next morning. Too loud. I couldn't stop smiling. By Saturday afternoon, I was standing inside the largest music store in town, staring at 2 gleaming beginner trumpets while the salesman explained practice books and online lesson subscriptions. I bought everything he recommended without asking for the price. As he packed the cases, he asked if they were for my nephews. No, I said, trying not to laugh. They're for my neighbors? Then I added one final item to the purchase, a beautifully bound instruction guide, whose first chapter proudly encouraged young musicians to begin every practice session at 6 o'clock each morning because consistency builds excellence. Driving home, I couldn't decide whether this was the pettiest thing I'd ever done, or the funniest. If you'd like to see exactly how Christmas morning turned Monica's perfect little power play into the biggest mistake she'd made as HOA president, Christmas morning arrived with that strange kind of quiet you only get after a fresh snowfall. The sidewalks were white, chimneys were smoking, and for a few hours it felt like every disagreement in the neighborhood had taken the day off. I almost convinced myself my little plan was too ridiculous to matter. Maybe Monica would refuse the gifts. Maybe she'd quietly donate them somewhere. Maybe I'd wasted a couple $1,000s proving a point nobody would ever notice. Then around 9 that morning, I carried the 2 gift boxes across the sidewalk, each wrapped in bright silver paper with oversized red bows, and rang the bell. Monica opened the door wearing the smile people say for when other neighbors are watching. Ethan, she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. How thoughtful. I noticed 3 families outside walking kids between houses, and I immediately understood why she couldn't simply shut the door in my face. Her sons came running into the entryway before she could say another word. Are those for us? One asked, eyes wide. Merry Christmas, I said. I remembered what you told me. Monica hesitated for a split second. Refusing gifts in front of your own children and several neighbors would have looked awful. So she stepped aside. Well, come in for just a minute. The boys tore through the wrapping paper with the kind of excitement only teenagers who genuinely were expecting expensive presents can have. The first trumpet case opened, and one of them actually froze. No way, he whispered. His brother opened the second case and practically shouted, Mom, these are real Yamahas. They looked happier than I'd ever seen them. Then one of them pulled out the instruction book. Daily success starts before sunrise. He read aloud before flipping through a few pages. It says professional musicians should practice every morning. I smiled. That's what every great musician I've ever met says. Small sessions before school. Another one after dinner. Consistency beats talent. Monica's eyes finally landed on the page where the suggested practice schedule began at 6 in the morning. Our eyes met for exactly 1 second. She understood. I understood that she understood. Neither of us said a word. I wished everyone Merry Christmas and headed home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The first morning after winter break, I woke up at 6 because, honestly, I was too curious to sleep. 6:10, nothing. 6:12, still quiet. Then at exactly 6:15, the first note exploded through the shared wall like a fire alarm learning jazz. It wasn't music yet. It was determination mixed with enthusiasm and absolutely no experience. One trumpet stumbled through scales while the other somehow found completely different notes. I buried my face in a pillow laughing so hard I could barely breathe. 15 minutes later, they were still going. At 7, they stopped just in time to get ready for school. I poured myself coffee feeling oddly refreshed. Around 4 that afternoon, they started again. This time, they were practicing together, which somehow sounded twice as loud and 4 times less coordinated. My coffee mugs rattled slightly inside the cabinet. Every wall in the townhouse vibrated with heroic attempts at major scales. Through all of it, I never complained because, why would I? Kids were learning an instrument during legal hours, encouraged by educational material, exactly what thoughtful Christmas gifts are supposed to do. 3 days later, someone pounded on my front door. Monica stood there wearing sweatpants, her hair tied back, dark circles under both eyes. She didn't bother pretending to be friendly anymore. You knew exactly what would happen, she snapped. They're practicing all day. I leaned against the doorway. That's wonderful. They're committed. Don't play games with me. I'm not. They wanted trumpets. They're driving everyone insane. Funny, I replied calmly. I thought encouraging children's hobbies was part of being a good community citizen. She stared at me, realizing I had borrowed her own wording from that Christmas letter. Tell them to stop. I shrugged. They're your kids. She took one step closer. You bought those because you wanted revenge. I smiled politely. No, Monica. I bought exactly what they asked for. The practice schedule came from professional musicians, not me. She spun around without another word, slamming my storm door hard enough to shake the frame. By the end of that week, something unexpected happened. The complaints started arriving, just not where Monica expected. Mrs. Alvarez from 2 units down cornered Monica while everyone was checking their mail. "Can you please get the boys some soundproofing?" she asked politely. Another neighbor chimed in. Then another. Nobody blamed the kids. Everyone blamed the parent responsible for supervising them. Monica had spent years telling residents that every homeowner was responsible for noise coming from their property. Now people were quoting the same rule back to her. HOA board emails started circulating. A few members privately admitted they were tired of Monica's heavy-handed leadership anyway. The Trumpets simply became the latest example that she couldn't solve problems she expected everyone else to solve. One afternoon, I ran into the twins walking home from school carrying their instrument cases. "Mr. Mercer," one of them said proudly, "our band teacher says we're improving." His brother grinned. "He wants us to audition for spring concert." I genuinely meant it when I congratulated them. None of this was ever about those boys. They were good kids caught in the gravitational pull of an overbearing parent. A few days later, the music suddenly stopped. No morning practice. No afternoon scales. Nothing. At first, I figured they were sick. But that evening, I overheard muffled crying through the wall. Then Monica's voice. Angry. Sharp. The next morning was silent again. Around lunchtime, I saw one of the boys sitting alone outside looking miserable. "Everything okay?" I asked casually. He forced a smile that fooled absolutely nobody. "Mom took the Trumpets away. She said we're done." That didn't sit right with me. She'd spent weeks telling everyone how important Christmas generosity was, then confiscated the very gifts she'd pressured the neighborhood into buying. I thought about it for a day before sending a carefully worded email to the boys' school music director. I explained that I donated the instruments as Christmas presents, that the students had shown genuine enthusiasm, and that I was concerned they were no longer being allowed to participate despite obvious interest. The director called me the following afternoon. He thanked me for supporting the arts and mentioned, almost casually, that he intended to speak with the family because both boys had demonstrated unusual commitment in class. Whatever that conversation sounded like, it didn't go well inside Monica's house. That night, the walls carried every raised voice. Cabinet doors slammed. Something heavy hit the floor. One of the boys yelled back for the first time since I'd known them. Then everything went quiet. The following week, the Trumpets returned. 6:15 sharp. The scales were back. Only this time they sounded better, cleaner, more confident. Ironically, Monica had fought so hard to stop the practice that she'd given the boys even more reason to keep going. Meanwhile, the neighborhood atmosphere kept shifting. Residents who had once been intimidated by Monica started pushing back over unrelated issues: parking enforcement, landscaping fines, budget transparency. It was as if one ridiculous Christmas letter had reminded everyone that authority only works when people agree to be intimidated by it. I didn't realize then that the real fallout hadn't even started yet, because within another few days, a pair of unfamiliar vehicles would pull into Monica's driveway. And what happened after those visits would change far more than the volume of 2 teenage trumpet players. 2 county vehicles rolled into the neighborhood just after lunch on a Wednesday. And within 5 minutes, every curtain on our street had shifted an inch. People in townhouse communities pretend they respect privacy. But the truth is, everybody notices government SUVs. I watched from my office window as 2 caseworkers walked up Monica's driveway carrying clipboards. At first, I assumed it had something to do with another HOA complaint until one of my neighbors texted me. "I think someone called family services." My stomach actually dropped. Whatever satisfaction I'd felt watching Monica deal with the consequences of her own behavior disappeared for a moment because this had crossed into something much bigger than noisy mornings in neighborhood politics. Over the next hour, the visitors went in and out of the house several times. Monica's husband arrived home from work looking completely confused, spoke with them outside for nearly 20 minutes, then disappeared inside with them again. Nobody knew exactly what had been reported, but over the previous week, several neighbors had heard screaming, doors slamming, and the boys crying loudly enough that it carried through the shared walls. Apparently, more than one resident had decided it wasn't just an angry parent having a bad day anymore. I never found out who made the first call, and honestly, I never asked. Some things are bigger than neighborhood gossip. 2 days later, I bumped into Monica's husband, David. While he was taking the trash out, he looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in days. He stopped me before I could say hello. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "For the police report, for everything." I told him he didn't owe me anything personally, but he shook his head. I should have stepped in a long time ago. There wasn't much else to say. Sometimes people stay silent because it's easier than confronting someone they live with. And eventually, that silence becomes its own problem. The boys kept practicing, although now the sessions sounded different. They weren't blasting random notes anymore. They were actually playing simple songs. One Saturday morning, I recognized the opening of Ode to Joy, rough around the edges, but unmistakable. Instead of feeling annoyed, several neighbors walked outside smiling. Mrs. Alvarez clapped from her driveway. Someone else joked that at least we were finally getting a free concert. The same sound Monica had called unbearable had slowly become background music for a community that was starting to heal. Then the HOA board announced a special meeting. Attendance was the highest I'd ever seen. People who had skipped meetings for years suddenly filled every folding chair. One homeowner after another stood up and spoke not about trumpets, but about selective enforcement, intimidation, unnecessary violation letters, and decisions made without transparency. The Christmas fundraiser came up more than once. Several residents admitted they'd paid simply because they were afraid of retaliation. Others described receiving warnings over tiny issues, while Monica ignored identical violations involving her friends. Listening to everyone, I realized my story had never really been unique. It had simply been the moment people stopped believing they had to accept being pushed around. Before the meeting ended, a petition calling for new HOA leadership had enough signatures to move forward. Monica never argued. She looked around the room, saw faces that no longer feared her, quietly closed her binder, and said, effective immediately, I resign. The room stayed silent. No cheering, no applause, just relief. A month later, a for sale sign appeared in front of her townhouse. By early spring, it sold for noticeably less than similar units nearby. A few weeks after closing, my realtor called with an opportunity I couldn't ignore. The buyer who had planned to rent it out backed away at the last minute because financing fell through. I ran the numbers, talked with my bank, and bought the unit myself. Today, that townhouse is occupied by a young married couple expecting their first child. They're wonderful neighbors. Every now and then, when I'm collecting the mail, one of Monica's now-grown sons stops by to visit friends in the neighborhood. Last summer, he told me he earned a music scholarship during his senior year of high school. He laughed and said, "You know, those trumpets changed my life." I laughed too because neither of us mentioned why he got them in the first place. Maybe some stories don't need every detail repeated. Looking back, people sometimes ask whether buying those gifts was petty. Maybe it was, but I never lied, never vandalized anything, never filed a false report, and never asked anyone to punish Monica. Every consequence she faced grew from choices she made after trying to control everyone around her. The trumpets were just the mirror that reflected those choices back at her. So now I'm curious what you think. If you had been in my position, would you have ignored the Christmas demand, confronted the HOA head-on, or handled it the same way I did? And where do you think the line is between harmless payback and taking things too far? Share your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this always spark some of the most interesting conversations, and I'd really like to hear where you stand.